So while shifting a crap load of audio equipment, a pamphlet was shoved frantically in my hand. Looking down, it said it was a screening for some film called Set Fire to the Stars. And in a fruitless attempt to expand my social circle, I decided to grab a ticket. Seriously, I met no one and ran away straight after. But it wasn't until I decided to research into the film further that my real interest began to peak. Shot in England, independently filmed, written by the co-lead, Elijah Wood was also starring and producing. Plus you've got sexpot Kelly Riley in it, and it's just about unknown enough to give me my dirty hipster fix. So after putting on my plaid shirt, woolen jumper and moustache wax, I decided to head off. I sat myself in a seat awkwardly to the right. Awful lot of pensioners roaming the streets late at night just for film screenings apparently. And the film begins, and two things immediately hit you. Now this sounds basic, I know, but it's sight and sound. Both of these elements, individually and combined, are both striking in their attempts to engage with the audience. But in keeping with the film's collaborative spirit, neither tries to outdo each other and the end result is almost seamless. The film itself looks absolutely fan-dabby-dozy in noir lush black and white, which while also setting the time period, also helps to set the somewhat dark, brooding tone that the film starts off with. The binary opposite forces of Wood and breakout star Kellen Jones are already apparent in their disparaging statures, but it's made all the clearer in the sharp, crisp, impressionistic world that the piece is set in. The score, funnily enough, was done by Super Furry Animals frontman and fellow Welshman Gruff Rhys, and was honestly heaps of fun to listen to, as it was constantly throwing new stuff at you to keep up with. But then, when later I found out that not only did he do 90% of the score himself, ranging from club jazz to emotional orchestral to swinging rock and roll, but he did so without seeing any of the final film, which impresses me if no one else. There are several moments within the film where Rhys's score will be the only sound heard. It's almost poetic really, controlling the rhythm and meter just enough to allow the audience to become fully immersed in the moment. The faces, the emotion. Fun fact, the decision to film in black and white was mostly because there is no known actual colour photo of the film's subject Dylan Thomas in existence. The eponymous poet is played with grand, straight out of the door tenacity by the film's co-screenwriter Kellen Jones, who shows nothing but promise with his highly nuanced yet potentially bombast performance. Think Timothy Spall meets Hopkins. The film as a whole seems to be a laboured passion piece for Jones, and this is reflected in the frankness in which he plays his warts and all characterisation of Thomas. Now, the fact that Thomas is played by a relative unknown may lend itself to the immersion I felt in the character, but his ability to tap into the breadth of empathy required for a biopic really assures me that this is not just some fluke. It would be impossible not to talk about the other major star of the picture, Elijah Wood. Now, while Daniel Radcliffe of late has been receiving a lot of acclaim for his attempt to ditch his own whorish franchise, but Wood here, like in 2012's Maniac and several other films, is another animal entirely. Once again showcasing that not only has he always had his own acting chops, but definitely has an eye for talent and interesting scripts. Thankfully, the two leads are dripping in chemistry. They bounce off each other almost effortlessly. And most importantly, never relies too heavily on standard buddy movie tropes. Taking place in 1950s New York, we follow fellow poet John Brennan, played by Wood, as he attempts to calm, subdue, placate, and do everything in his power to keep Thomas Dillon compos mentis for his live shows. So I've noticed recently, and I feel like I need to bring it up, it's something that a lot of biopics have attempted to do recently, which is an attempt to cover too much of the subject's life. I've always felt that when a movie tries to cover someone's whole life, essentially when you try and cover someone's whole life, you tend to dilute what the true meaning of their life was, if you know what I mean.
Stretched like butter scraped over too much bread.
Since we're following their whole life in a film, they really can't progress as a normal human would and therefore give an accurate representation of their life. What we therefore get is essentially turning someone's life story into a 3-act structure, removing many elements that otherwise would have made it far more interesting. Set Fire to the Stars, however, literally takes place over what could be best described as a week at most, but the detail and minutiae that we can absorb in this carefully sewn web of events means that we get the same, if not more, understanding and catharsis out of the life of one man without having to see his whole life at all. And yet, there is still a reasonable arc in all of this. Think of it as kind of Rocky meets Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but for poets. Now, while the film is set firmly in New York and the outlying counties, you'd be forgiven for assuming that it was shot there at all. Because apart from the odd, hokey matte painting, everything that you see was shot on location in, you guessed it, Swansea? While the black and white film does assist somewhat in bringing that illusion to life, the fact that just a few set dressings, songs, costumes and accents can make a real difference in making an audience believe that they're somewhere else. It's a real testament to the filmmaker's budgeted craft. Oh, and speaking of accents, be prepared to see some familiar British TV faces, or as I call them, Channel 4 core, featuring as Americans. And knocking the ball out of the park, oddly, opting for a more down-to-earth tone than trying to do yet another Hepburn. Only Blanchett can pull that off. But yeah, the cast is insane. But then again, when aren't they in low-budget UK productions? Okay, some negative points. Well, most of these aren't to do with the film itself, more just my little nitpicks really. Yes, it would have been nicer if the budget had allowed better footage of New York. Yes, it would have been nice to hear more of Dylan's poetry. Yes, it would have been nice to see more of his home life and wife. But what's left at the end of the day is a very specific vision of a Thomas Dylan biopic. Yet ultimately it's undeniably enjoyable to watch, the pacing is fun, as are the characters, and the story has enough mysterious tension to keep us going throughout. Yet in all of this I can't help but feeling that a review like this is almost a little hypocritical. The central theme of the film itself is that emotion outweighs understanding and reason. Towards the end of the film, Dylan reviews a piece of homework that Brennan is marking. He says, "If you want to tell him something useful, tell him Dylan Thomas thinks it's great." So on that note, I can't say if I myself have done anything to explain the why, but what I can say is that it made me feel joy, it made me feel sorrow, cliche I know, but mostly it made me feel inspired. Not inspired to make this video, but in that sense that smaller, thoughtful, different films can come together like this when you have the perfect blend of a good director with the money, good available actors, a writer with a good script, a director with a good vision. Okay, now it's depressing me more than it's encouraging me, but anyway, if you want to see something legitimately different and good and support a debut director, go see this movie, support it. It's great.